Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm your host, Park Howell, and I am so proud to welcome Sendable as our sponsor. Sendable is the social media management platform that I personally prefer to handle all of our storytelling online. Sendable has generously offered you, an ardent Business of Story listener, an incredible 30% discount on their traction plan. It's normally $99 a month, but if you use my link, you can get it for just $69 a month. So visit sendable.com/park30 to start your free 30-day trial today.
I thought it was just a stupid picture of a pig in the ocean. But after hearing that story, I had to have it. Now I wasn't just buying a picture. I was buying a story. Story literally made the picture worth more money to me.
That's what businesses are about. People buy brands. People buy stories much more than anything else.
I work with a lot of big enterprise companies, but let's just say I always tell folks, drop the PowerPoint, close your laptops, start with your story.
If you want people to get engaged and you want people to act, you have to tell them an emotionally powerful story. That's with great characters, it's with uncertain outcomes, and it's with high stakes and drama.
All business strategy is a story.
Hey, welcome back to Business of Story. Park Howell here. I am so glad you are with us today. It's an interesting show because something that's kind of out of our typical approach to brand and business storytelling, yet incredibly relevant. In fact, when today's guest reached out about being on the show just a couple months ago, I was thinking, what does recession-proofing your business have to do with brand storytelling? You know, this isn't a financial podcast, but I was kind of intrigued. So then I heard his story and I thought, whoa, you know what? The next recession may be closer than we all think. Now, having barely survived the last great recession with my ad agency intact, I was intrigued because that downturn was one of the big reasons why I completely rethought my own brand story and why I created the Business of Story. Because I wanted a platform of business that would not only thrive in the best of times, but to be resilient in the worst of times. And I realized that recession-proofing your brand and business should be at the top of everyone's mind right now. Then we did the interview, and I thought to myself, even before we started it, well, if this is too financially focused, I can bail on it. But I was blown away by not only his storytelling, but the story he went through and the stories we need to reframe for ourselves just to get prepared for the next downturn. Jonathan Slane is the founder and CEO of Recession.com, and he's got a new book out, Rock the Recession: How Successful Leaders Prepare for, Thrive During, and Create Wealth After Downturns. Now, after being pummeled himself by the Great Recession, he shares what he learned during those turbulent times, keeping his personal training gyms afloat. John is now a highly respected keynote speaker and a sought-after expert on recessions and why business owners don't need to fear them. Thank God for that. He spent the last Great Recession huddled in the fetal position on the floor of his office. He borrowed $250,000 from his mother-in-law just to survive. John paid his mother-in-law back and is now a highly sought-after consultant, and yes, he's still married. Jonathan leverages his experience in investment banking in the School of Hard Knocks because he doesn't want anyone to have to borrow money from their mother-in-law in the next recession. So please welcome to the show, Jonathan Slane. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Let's rock. Thanks for having me, Park.
Hey, where are you coming to us from today?
I am in Cleveland, Ohio, where it is unseasonably warm right now.
Beautiful Cleveland. Didn't you guys just get a new head football coach?
We did. That happens just about every year, though, so it's not huge news.
I was going to say this is like your fifth new head coach in 6 years or something like that.
Yeah, we're getting closer, though.
Who'd you hire?
What's that guy's name?
Uh-oh, that's a bad sign already. Actually, it might be a really good sign. They're going after youth, which I think is a good call in the coaching circles.
Yeah, look, Park, until they've been here for at least a year, you're always going to catch me on that because I can't commit it to memory that quickly. Not worth it for me.
Well, you're the recession guy, the Rock the Recession. And today we're going to be talking about how do you reframe a recession in all of its forms and take advantage of it. You guys in Cleveland, unfortunately, have been kind of in a recession in football for the last couple decades.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the book here, the reason that we wrote it is because we thought we had an original take on recessions. I know that the conventional wisdom, the usual story, is that in a recession, you should just turtle up, do what you need to do to survive, which usually means cutting overhead, firing people, and chopping expenses. And that book's already been written. Our story is more, what does it look like if you use a recession as an opportunity to 10x your business, 10x your life, and also if you could be in a position to look forward to the next recession as opposed to fearing it.
So you could look forward to it in the hopes of taking advantage of it in one way, shape, or form.
Exactly, because they come around every 7 to 10 years in the United States since World War II. And when they do come around, the disruption provides a massive opportunity for those that are smart enough to listen to the podcast, or smart enough to read the book and get prepared. And so a lot of it was researching what's different about the people in the book that actually made recessions great opportunities versus most of us who got crushed by the last recession.
So tell us, what happened to you? How did you handle the last recession?
Well, my story in the Great Recession really took place mostly underneath my desk in the fetal position. And so,
what line of work were you in?
Well, so I owned and operated fitness centers, personal training studios. And Park, that's about the worst business that you can be positioned in a recession.
Because what's the first thing that's going to go is me having to go work out and pay that bill.
Yeah, we'll talk about a discretionary expense. It's like $70 an hour to have a personal trainer. So even if you're committed to still working out in a recession, everybody's going to move downstream. And I didn't have a plan. And so when we started losing clients and we weren't able to get new ones, my story is that I borrowed a few bucks from my mother-in-law in order to survive the Great Recession.
I think it was like $250,000, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, a few bucks, give or take. You're already laughing. The worst part, Park, is that it wasn't even like I borrowed it all at once. I would call my mother-in-law every 2 weeks and ask her for $20,000 because that was about how much I needed to make payroll.
And so how big was your operation?
We had 5 locations around Cleveland, had 30 people in our Fitness Together family that were working with us. And so, yeah, every 2 weeks, like I said, about 20,000. And looking back, I wonder why after the 5th phone call or the 6th or the 7th, why my mother-in-law was still willing to keep loaning me the money and why I was willing to still keep making that phone call every 2 weeks, thinking that the turning point was near. So a lot of the book is like, if I had had an emergency brake, if I had had a plan that maybe I would get to 100,000 in debt, but then I would cut it off, maybe I could have saved myself a few bucks. And I've now paid my mother-in-law back, so it's not awkward at Thanksgiving anymore. And I think the whole thing actually brought us closer together. But looking back, I probably went way in deeper than I needed to if I wasn't making emotional decisions.
So were you in that throes of trying to save the company? And so you're making those emotional decisions to reinvest in it, hoping that you could weather the storm?
Yeah, I think part of it, it definitely was that. And also, I think society at least has taught me that failure is personal. And so a lot of it was that I was taking it personally. I wasn't willing to let the business fail, even though the market was obviously telling me that it didn't want personal training during the recession. I just wasn't willing to let it go. And so that's where it got emotional and I made bad decisions to keep putting more and more money into it. And then you've got that sunk cost mentality. So I've already put a lot into it. So now I have to keep putting more and more in. And that's really just where my thinking was very, I had blinders and couldn't get out of my own way and just had so much decision fatigue from the employees coming in and asking, if we were going to close, and from vendors asking when they were going to get paid. that just ran out of energy to make good decisions, I guess.
How long did you keep it afloat?
It still exists today. So
Oh, it does?
My brother-in-law actually bought the business, my half of it from me about 3 years ago, and, paid my mother-in-law back, and now doing full-time consulting work. Because the other thing I figured out, Park, is that while I love to work out and I love to be fit, I actually don't love helping other people get in shape. So I learned those are two very different things. But my brother-in-law is the gym rat in the family, and he still owns the business, and they're thriving. So it worked out from that standpoint.
Yeah. Well, you got to know your own story, don't you? I mean, if that was the story you first told yourself to get through it, I like that term of decision fatigue. I know that feeling as well. But then sounds like you woke up one day and said, you know what? I'm in the wrong story. I don't even like getting these people in shape.
Yeah, well, I wish I could tell you, I wish I could tell you I had a grand plan for that, but it was just really serendipity of what my franchises of the gym were actually some of the best in the franchise system. Even though we got clobbered in the recession, before the recession, we had the most personal training sessions in the system out of 500 units. We had the most revenue. We're doing great. And so other friends that own businesses asked me if I would do some work with them, do some strategic planning. And so that's where I got started in the consulting world. And from there, figured out that that's what I was really passionate about, was really great at. And so over time, eventually my brother-in-law said, hey, it doesn't seem like you're really passionate about the fitness business. Why don't you do the consulting thing full time? I'll buy the businesses from you. And so that's how that happened.
I got you. So now you've got recession.com. So it sounds like you are all in on this recession thing. Tell us about that transition and what you're doing over at recession.com.
So I was working with clients all over the country doing strategic planning, and looked up and it discovered that a lot of my clients happen to be in the construction space. So doing a lot of construction work. And from there, when that happened, started to get nervous because I know that construction is about the worst place that you can be positioned in a recession.
And what year are we talking about now? So when you were, first started this up and were looking around at your construction clients?
Yeah, so I have to disclose that I'm a recovering investment banker. Mm-hmm. And when I was doing investment banking, I did a good bit of work with some contractors, construction, basic industries. And so that's where I kind of got hooked into that industry. But understanding, I guess it was around 2014, 2015 that I started to look around and think that we're probably getting close to a recession, given the economic indicators, and just given the fact that if we have a recession in the US every 7 to 10 years, and it's been close to 7 years since we had one, what could I do with the companies that I serve to figure out how they could get ahead of it so that they would look forward to the recession instead of just having to figure out how to survive it? In all candor, Park, selfishly, I know that consultants are one of the first things to get cut in a recession. So figuring out for myself, how could I position myself so that I would hopefully be cut last as the recession consultant versus being one of the first things to be cut as the strategic planning consultant.
And this all came out of what you experienced then in the Great Global Recession?
So that certainly left a mark on me. The other thing is that my mentor, who I wrote the book with, Paul Belair, had a very different recession story than I did. And that was part of the reason that we wrote the book too, was that we had such a good compare and contrast that we just thought that it was a story worth telling that was original versus the usual recession stories. I mean, Paul's story, I was under my desk in the fetal position during the Great Recession. Paul and his team invested $1 million in buying an HVAC contractor. They grew that business during the Great Recession, and then they sold it for over $70 million.
Wow.
And so, again, they took a contractor that does heating and air conditioning, and then over 5 years, they grew it and then sold it for a 70x return. And so compare that with being under your desk and borrowing $250,000 from your mother-in-law.
So the book, Rock the Recession, How Successful Leaders Prepare for, Thrive During, and ellipsis. So the and is, I suppose, how to flourish afterwards, or
Right.
sell it for 70 times what you bought it for.
Yeah. You want to create wealth after the downturn. And it's like, the recessions come around not so often, but when they do, there's massive disruption. And so for the audience, it's like, what can you do? How can you position yourself so that when the recession hits, it serves as a tailwind so that you can pounce as opposed to turtling up and just trying to survive. So in the book, the first step for us is to get people to think about how they can assess their current situation. So, benchmarking yourself and your company to understand where you are in your preparation versus all of the other companies and businesses out there.
And what do you look for in that assessment? Because I imagine this is kind of new ground to most people. They're not thinking recession. It's a little bit like a hurricane coming their way. They know it's coming eventually, and they batten down the hatches. But what do they have to do to properly prepare for one?
Well, so the assessment, and we have it, it's free. It's 20 questions. It takes 5 or 10 minutes, and it's on recession.com. So the audience can go do that and check it out. You'll get a score from 0 to 100. If you're a 0, it's likely you're going to go bankrupt in the next recession. If you're 100, then you're looking forward to it. Can't wait till the next recession hits because of the opportunities that you'll have. And then what we're finding, Park, is that we've had over 1,000 people do it, and our average score right now, you want to take a guess, or do you want me to just tell you?
I'm guessing your average score right now is 10.
I like it how you cheated closer to the bottom. It's actually a 38.
Okay.
So the average score is a 38 right now. So if you take it and you're above a 38, you can feel pretty good. And if you're below a 38, you've definitely got some work to do. But once you know your score and you know the areas that you're deficient, then the second step would be to tune up your business and your personal life. And that's where we get into some of the specific tactical recommendations for what people can do to get ready to rock the recession.
Okay, before we do that, give us some of the ideas of some of the questions or what or how you were exploring people's psyche in the preparation in this assessment. What do you ask of them?
Sure. So it's like, do you have debt available to you, a line of credit, so that in a recession, you would be able to buy other companies, be able to buy assets, or be able to afford hiring great people? And then we just ask people if they're green on that, yellow, or red.
Mm-hmm.
If you're red, then starting to think through, right now is the best time to go to your bank and ask them for a line of credit, whether it's a signature line loan, whether it's a home equity line of credit, or whether it's a business line of credit. Because the economy is booming. Banks are hungry for business and they don't have enough clients to serve, so you can get credit right now. In a recession, I think that the audience is going to find that banks, they love loaning you money, except when you really need it. So that's
Right.
where I want people thinking through, like, do you have access to capital? And it doesn't have to be just debt, Park. I mean, if people have cash, then that works the same. My point is just that I want people to have a war chest available to them, whether it's cash or debt or a mixture, so that when we hit a recession and there's opportunities, people can pounce on them.
Mm-hmm. So that definitely comes from your investment banker days, I guess. What are some of the other things that you talk about in the assessment?
Well, so like for personal guarantees, so for the audience out there, if you have a personal guarantee on debt, right now is a great time to have a conversation with your bank to reduce, cap, or eliminate those personal guarantees. And since we haven't had a recession in over a decade, I think people are just kind of complacent right now. They're not really thinking about their personal guarantees. Everybody feels pretty good about being able to make their payments, and so they're not worried about it. But right now, you could go to your bank, you could ask to have your deal restructured if you are a company, so that maybe you reduce your exposure, so that if we do hit a recession, if you're not able to pounce and instead, you're having a hard time, instead of you being on the line and losing all of your assets, maybe you can build in some protection. That's a conversation that you can have with the bank right now that definitely will not be something that they'll consider once we're in a downturn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Get your financial wherewithal in place so that when it hits, and we know it's going to hit eventually, that you're good to go. What have you seen as far in branding, positioning of a company, even the stories they tell? And I talk about that because I think back of Jim Stengel's book. I don't know if you've read this one, called Grow. And Jim Stengel was a international brand dude for Procter and Gamble, and he examined brand ideals and those brands that stood for more than just what they sold. And this is brands that were doing this back in the 90s and early 2000s. They were kind of a bit ahead of schedule. And he surveyed 50 brands and identified, a bunch of brands, but identified 50 brands that outperformed the S&P 500 by more than 400% during the aughts, through into the recession. So from like 2001 to 2010, I think he did it. And he wrote this terrific book on it called Grow and Brand Ideals, or, the brand purpose. You stand for something more than just what you make. And his point and the case studies in it are made that a solid purpose-driven brand story can help you weather, survive, and even thrive in a downturn like that, because people aren't so much thinking of you as a commodity as they're thinking you as a value partner, someone whose beliefs and values that they share with them. And so even in the hardest times, they are able to maintain market share. How does that jive with what you have seen and researching about recessions?
Yeah, so I agree with all of that. Love that. As we looked at the research done by social scientists and done by business scientists, what we find is that in a recession, typically people cut back on marketing. It's probably the second thing to go after they fire the consultants, is that they start to reduce on marketing. And what we found is that the companies that did best, the brands that did best, are the ones that actually increased their marketing dollars, which is paradoxical because it's counter to the conventional wisdom. But if there's less people marketing, then it stands to reason that every dollar you spend on marketing goes further and you have more ROI, because if nobody else is willing to spend money on online ads, on TV ads, on print ads, whatever form of media, then all of your spending gets magnified if you're able to stick with it. And the story that comes to mind is one that Christy Hefner told me. Christy Hefner ran Playboy after her dad, Hugh, ran Playboy and was executive there for 10 years. And she said that when they were considering how they approached the recession, they started to think through that less people would be going to the newsstand. And I know that some of the audience might not know that there was a time when Playboy was actually sold on newsstands. So they knew that foot traffic would be down. And so they started to think through how could they grow the brand in other directions, and what could they do during a recession to make sure that they kept growing the business. And one of the things they did was to really focus on their licensing. So they spent more time figuring out how they could put that Playboy logo on other staples that people would continue to buy in recessions, as opposed to really pushing just the magazine out on newsstands.
So they had to change their business model appreciably, just kind of rebranding or selling the value of that Playboy brand and just attach it to other things. And so they ginned up revenue during down times when they figured their magazines weren't going to be selling as much.
Exactly. And they also marketed more than they did beforehand, which most business leaders either don't do or don't have the guts to do. And so a lot of it with this whole Rock the Recession thing is to get a written recession plan now, because it's like trying to change the tire on your car when you're going down the highway at 70. It's impossible, because you're making decisions when you're emotional, when things are already moving too fast. We want people to come up with their plan in the cool, rational light of day, and then put it under glass. And then when they're announcing on CNN and that we're in recession, and when Fox News is saying that, we're in a downturn and there's a crash in the market on CNBC, break the glass, get out your recession plan, and then you can just execute. You don't want to be like me, where you have to spend the first couple months of the recession under your desk just trying to figure out the plan and then get to executing, because you'll miss out on a lot of the great opportunities that come up right when we're announcing it.
Well, nice. I imagine a recession, it's like the worst thing you could be thinking about in business, or one of them anyways. But one of the big things that impact a lot of people is it puts you into survival mode. So the first thing you do is hack, cut, slash, stop investing. And even though you said it's paradoxical earlier, it's only paradoxical because we bought into that particular story. That's what you should do because that's what our instincts are. But really, if we can overcome those instincts, it's like, no, how can I just invest differently and take advantage of the sheeple that are running off the cliff and not spending money in marketing and other things? How can you do an end run around that and take advantage of that, I guess? Or look at different ways of expressing your brand. What are other things that people could be doing or thinking about in preparing their company for a recession?
Well, the big ones are, if you're looking forward to it, what businesses can you buy in a recession? What assets can you buy? And what A players can you hire? And so right now, the tactical answer is that you need to be having conversations with the 5 or 10 businesses that you would love to buy. I mean, think about it this way, Park. Maybe there's a company out there and it's your competitor, and they really annoy you because it seems like every month they're hiring away one of your best people. And maybe they're always undercutting you and you don't even know how they do it, but they undercut you on being able to get a deal with a client or selling a product for slightly cheaper than you sell it. And it's really aggravating. In a recession, they may be a perfect acquisition. So staying close to those competitors, having conversations with them, and then maybe in a recession, you've got the inside track. So if the owner of that business doesn't have as strong of a company as you do, if the owner of that business is tired and they just don't want to go through another downturn, then maybe you'll be the first one that they call to acquire the business. But if you wait until we're in a recession, it's a lot harder to make those acquisitions happen because then you're opportunistic. People don't trust you because there's no relationship. There's no story that you've built up with them beforehand. And so it's doing some of that legwork to get close to those potential acquisitions now, as opposed to just waiting when we're in the recession. The other tactical thing for the audience that I love to bring up is that in the Great Recession, one of the things that I was able to do was to buy gym equipment for cheap. I was really good at that. And so what I mean by that is that I had formed relationships with bankers and let them know that if you ever have fitness equipment and you want to sell it quickly, I'm your guy. And so what happened was I would get inbound calls from the bank and they would say, look, we've got a gym. It's in New York City. They just went out of business and we were wondering if you would want to buy their equipment. And they would send me an Excel spreadsheet of the equipment they had. It would be maybe $35,000 worth of equipment. And then Park, I would call him and I'd say, hey, I'll give you $1,000. And this is a real deal that I did. And the guy was like, give me an hour. And he called me back and he was like, I talked to my boss. If you overnight us a check for $1,000, the equipment's yours. And so again, the reason that I had that opportunity was because that there were 5 to 10 bankers that I was regularly telling, I'm your guy to buy equipment. I'm your guy to buy equipment. If you ever have equipment, the banks will do that deal because banks don't want to own gym equipment. They would have to rent a truck. They would have to get 4 strong guys, which banks don't have a lot of, to go pick up the equipment. Then they'd have to put it in a storage unit. They'd have to hire an auctioneer to sell it, and the auctioneer would want a third of whatever they make. It's just a pain for them. So I think for the audience, if they're out there and they're like, I'm a bakery and I really want an oven, and it's $20,000 and I don't have that, then can you have conversations with the banks to let them know that you're the person that wants to buy that equipment if they ever come across it?
So people aren't thinking about that sort of thing in these times because things are going so well. And it sounded like you did it out of survival mode, right? I mean, because you were thrown into it like everybody, all the rest of us, and you've, I guess, figured out a way. Here's another way I can make money in my industry. But people aren't thinking about that while the weather's nice and the sailing is calm. So this is what they do at recession.com and through your program is to start putting those ideas together.
Yeah, at the website we have the assessment. That's the starting point. From there, there's a workbook and there's a whole kit so that people at their companies can put together a whole recession plan. So that's where we want people to go with it. At the end of the day, the last step in our process is the emergency brake. So that's more of your traditional recession plan, where it's like if you have $1 million company and you see it sliding to 900,000, then what are the expenses that you would cut in what order? If you saw it declining to 800,000, what would you cut in what order? 700,000, 600,000, so that you can plan that out now in the cool, rational light of day, like we've said, instead of when things are emotional and you make bad decisions.
Now, I imagine you've got some good stories of companies now in hindsight, when you look back on it in the research that you've done for recession.com, that highlight people that did it really well during the recession coming out of the other end, right?
Yeah, so definitely do. So one of the stories, so I want to talk more about Paul and how they did that $1 million to $70 million magic in 63 months.
I was hoping you were going to go there because I was kind of curious how that happened too.
Right.
Before we get there though, Jonathan, I want to take a quick break for our marvelous sponsor, Sendable. And then when we come back, you share the magic with us on how they did that during the worst global recession, well, the world's ever seen. I know that's redundant, but it's the truth. So let's cover that, Jonathan, right after this. Many of you have been following me in the Business of Story on social media for a while now, and I really appreciate it. And if you're not, I hope you will. We share valuable business storytelling tips to help your brand stand out among the awful noise out there. And we do it all thanks to Sendable, a social media management platform that helps over 3,000 digital agencies worldwide to work with their clients, breathe life into their brands, and get their stories heard on social media. What we like about Sendable is they make it super easy to manage your content and your stories online. They allow you to source content from clients and collaborate closely with them to create a social media strategy built on true and proven storytelling principles. You can reliably plan and schedule content to be automatically published to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest, and more. And you can demonstrate the impact that this content has had on your audience growth and conversion by reaching out through their in-depth reporting and analytics. There's much, much, much more that you can do. But you know what? I think maybe my favorite feature has to be Smart Posts functionality. Now, what Smart Posts are is it makes it incredibly easy to craft social media content and in one single step, customize it for each platform, giving you the best chance of driving engagement and getting people to pay attention to your content. Sendable truly makes managing so many channels an absolute breeze. I know, you have a lot of choices when it comes to social media management apps, so I wanted to let you know we here at the Business of Story can't recommend Sendable enough. Gavin and his team are so great that they have a special offer just for you. You can now get, as a special offer for Business of Story listeners, Sendable's Traction Plan for only $69 a month. That's a 30% savings. So sign up now at sendable.com/Park30. Believe me, your stories will take off. Welcome back to the Business of Story. Park Howell here with Jonathan Slane, Rock the Recession, the guy that put together Recession.com that is helping us prepare our future. I mean, really, you're thinking of fictional storytelling here because you have got to imagine what this fiction is going to look like when it becomes fact and the next recession hits and how to prepare to be able to perform and thrive and flourish during that time. So great to have you here talking about it. Take us to your business partner there and how they did it with this HVAC business.
Well, while I was thinking during the break, and while we've got everybody ready for this cliffhanger, I want to tell Paul's story, but I want the audience to think too, so maybe you disagree with me that we're going to have a downturn in 2020, which I believe is where we're going to see a downturn. But
do you think, how significant of a downturn do you think we'll see?
I think it's going to be relatively significant, and I think it's going to last for a good bit of time. The reason, Park, is that right now, the Federal Reserve, which is the big bank that controls the money flow for all the other banks, I don't know how much the audience wants to geek out on this economic stuff, but we just don't have that many arrows left in our quiver because the Federal Reserve has already lowered interest rates. And that's generally what we do in a recession as a country to be able to help us get out of it. And also, the Federal Reserve has been doing something called quantitative easing, which again, I don't want to get into the technical details, but the point is that generally we've never gone into a downturn having this little leverage for using those levers for the greater economy to fix it. So I do think that we're going to have a downturn. I think it's probably going to be related to people pulling back on spending, businesses and consumers with the big election that we have coming up in this country in November. And then I think it's going to take a long time to get out of it because there just aren't as many tools at our disposal to help the country out of recession. All that said, though, if you're in the audience, if you're listening to us still and you're rolling your eyes and you don't agree with me, that's fine, because all the same stuff applies even if you're in a non-economic recession. And what I mean by that, Park, is like if you lose your biggest client, then you might be in a recession agnostic of what's going on in the economy. The economy could be booming all around you. You lose your biggest one or two clients, your business is in a recession. Or, I don't know, maybe your business partner decides to leave your company, go across the street, and start a competing business with your three best people. That would put you into a recession. Or maybe you find out that your CFO or your controller or financial person is embezzling from you, and then you're in a recession. So even if you don't agree with me that we're going to have an economic recession, all this stuff still applies, and all of the recession planning would still work, regardless of what's going on in the economy.
Yeah, because isn't kind of the scary thing is this economy seems to be very robust and moving forward. And, you know, of course, Trump gave the tax cuts, and I don't really know if that had any impact or bearing on where we are now. But it sure seems all, you know, beautiful and sunny and bright out there right now. But that is, it's really the brightest before the storm sometimes, isn't it?
I mean, it always is. Consumer confidence is at record highs right now. It always hits record highs right before we have a big drop in the economy because of typically we have a black swan event. So it may be like there was the tech bubble when we had the recession back around 2000. And then the Great Recession was tipped off because of the housing crisis. And now we've got a lot of geopolitical noise going on. So right now in the world, the US and Iran are maybe on the brink of war. We never know, though, what will be that black swan event that's the straw that breaks the camel's back. The whole point here for the audience is to just be prepared to rock the recession. So if tomorrow oil spikes and all of a sudden the price of a barrel of oil goes up by 50% or 75% and shocks us into a recession, you're ready. You've got a war chest. You've talked to the bank. You've set yourself up with a line of credit. You've made sure your personal guarantees are limited. And so all those things apply.
So let's go back to Paul's story. Give us an example of how he got through it and what we can learn from that.
So Paul and his team bought a really not sexy business. They bought an HVAC contractor in Youngstown, Ohio called Roth Brothers. And Roth installed heating and air conditioning systems for other companies. So heating and air conditioning system breaks, you call Roth, they come out, and they'll put a new air conditioning unit on the roof of your building, 10,000, 15, 20,000. And so what Paul and his team saw was that a recession was approaching, and that in a recession, people don't want to spend 10, 15, 20 grand on a new heating or air conditioning system. They want to use chewing gum and duct tape and whatever is needed to service it and keep it working to get through without a big capital expenditure. And so before the recession hit, they spent all the time and effort and resources to change the business from doing 80% construction and 20% service to doing 80% service work and 20% construction. When the Great Recession hit, they were one of the top providers of service for all of these companies that needed their units worked on, but didn't want to invest in getting a brand new one. And that was a real tailwind that allowed them to grow rapidly over 3 or 4 years and then sell the company to a Fortune 500.
So did they anticipate the recession and bought Roth Brothers prior to it, knowing that this was going to be the outcome of the recession, or had the recession hit and then Roth Brothers needed to bail out and these guys came in?
So the longer version of the story is that Paul, my co-author, was the CFO of Roth Brothers and worked for the company for years leading up to his purchase of it. And the company, when he bought it, was owned by First Energy, which is a utility electric company in Ohio. And at the time, I don't know if do you remember the brownouts that happened back on the East Coast? A lot of that was caused by First Energy. And so their board said that, hey, you have to sell off all the non-core assets. And what that meant was that they owned this HVAC company and they sold it to Paul and his team because they just decided to divest everything that wasn't related to energy so that they could really focus again and stop having the brownouts.
Yeah,
and
so Paul was in the heart of this business already, so he had a good sense of what he was getting himself into and how they were going to have to pivot once the recession hit.
Absolutely. And at the same time, they were weird in that they had 18 people in their IT department, Park, which I don't know of many construction companies that have an IT department with 18 people. But what they saw was that the more intellectual property they had, the more that they could work with the companies as a partner, which I know is what you're all about, that in a recession, they wouldn't be a commodity that just got the boot, so that they could go find another lower cost provider. Because they had that intellectual property, they were able to add value for the companies they worked with to keep their margins strong, even in the middle of the recession.
So how did that IT division come into play here? When you're saying they're partners, are you talking about the other HVAC companies and somehow they were helping to support them?
No, so their IT department at the company was working for the clients to integrate their heating and air conditioning and to be able to give them measurements like maybe your building doesn't need as much heat as you're giving it because you're overheating it or overcooling it at night when there's nobody at the building. So
I see. So they would come in and do an assessment of the building for these people instead of in the old days, they would have just come and replaced out the unit. Now they were coming in. Let's first give you an assessment and figure out what's going to be the most efficient way to tackle this problem. Quite often,
exactly. So they were saving them money on top of servicing instead of doing construction. But this is back in the Great Recession. This is back in 2008, 9, 10, before every building had a Nest and before the technology with the Internet of Things made it ubiquitous. So they were really on the leading edge. And I guess that's part of what we learned as we look at all these companies that rocked the recession, is that they were in front of a lot of these trends in the same way that Christy Hefner at Playboy was a leader, because there are very few companies that spend into marketing in a recession. There's very few companies that are construction companies that grow their IT departments in a recession. And so those were the things that they were doing on purpose that made them different and let them have access to be able to rock the recession as opposed to getting rocked by it.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. So 2 hypotheticals for you. Let's tackle the first one, because a lot of my listeners are solopreneurs and they're out there, helping companies. They are certainly in that consulting role. And as you mentioned earlier, when the next big recession hits, one of the first things to go are the consultants. What would you tell them? How would a consultant, regardless of what line of work they're in, start preparing and thinking about positioning themselves and their brand for the next big recession, which, to your point, could happen before we figure out who our next president is?
Well, yeah, so 2 big things come to mind, and I never get to talk about this first one, so I'm excited about this. So for me, radical candor is that part of this is because I want to help make sure that everybody rocks the recession. The other piece is that as a consultant, this is a hedge for me too, because my consulting business is strong right now. It's going great. And if it drops off in a recession, then I think that we're going to have a lot more need for recession consulting. And so I think that part of my business will grow. if the strategic planning part of the business is going down. So for the audience, it's thinking through what's that hedge that you could start working on, so that if your current business declines in a recession, you've got something to pivot to that's already set up so that you're not scrambling. So that's the first thing. And then the second piece would be really thinking through the diversity of your client base. So if you're that solopreneur and you're a consultant and you're serving jewelry stores, and everybody that you consult for is a jewelry store, probably not going to be good for you in the next recession, because jewelry stores tend not to do very well. So starting to think through what are the industries, what are the end markets that you can serve that we know from history at least is good in a recession and is not in a recession, if not grow. So if you want me to rattle some off.
Yeah, would you? I was curious about that.
Yeah. So like healthcare is kind of an obvious one, because people are sick in recessions. They still need healthcare regardless of what's going on in the economy. I like the ones that are less obvious. So think through, like, I was just reading about tortilla manufacturing. So as it turns out, tortilla manufacturing in the US is growing and growing rapidly. And if you think through it, I guess we have more of a taste for tortillas in this country. You know, Chipotle is definitely growing, maybe driving the need for more tortillas. In a recession, people are going to transition from higher priced food to lower priced food. Burritos are cheap, they're filling. So I think that things like tortillas, if you can consult for tortilla businesses wherever you find them, I know that's a crazy niche park, but I do think if you're in that business, they're obviously going to continue to do well, if not do even better in a recession. Another crazy one I was thinking about is veterinary clinics. So one thing, I was looking at the numbers, veterinary clinics did just as well in the Great Recession as before, because people don't care, Park. They will pay whatever, they'll put it on a credit card. If your dog gets sick, you are going to have the dog taken care of, the cat taken care of. It doesn't matter. So again, would rather see solopreneurs positioned with vet clinics, with healthcare, with tortillas, than positioned with things like jewelry stores. That's bad. Hotels and motels are going to get killed in recessions. Four-year universities drop in recessions because people go and they spend their money on education with community colleges, which will go up. Restaurants don't do as well, but grocery stores do better because people stop eating out. They go to the grow more. So I just want people to be thinking through, what are the staples? What are the things that we think people will buy? What are maybe some of the things? I think Netflix will do well, for example, because people are going to need an outlet for entertainment. And they may spend less on vacations, but still want some entertainment at home. Maybe they don't want to go out to the movies. So just thinking through, what will the world look like when we hit the next recession? And since I'm guessing a lot of the audience wasn't even in business in the Great Recession over 10 years ago, got to think about this now, because probably don't have a lot of historical experience with it.
Yeah, when you're talking about earlier, when you're saying you want to hedge, you're taking a bet, you're trying to, can you describe or explain what you mean by hedge?
Yeah, so I'm always thinking, like, I'm a solopreneur, like a lot of the audience. You know, I have an admin that works for me, and I have some virtual assistants. But besides that, it's thinking through, if my income dropped off because all of a sudden I couldn't travel, or all of a sudden my clients hated me and didn't want to work with me anymore for whatever reason, then what would I pivot to? What would that have to look like? And so by hedge, I mean having a plan B, a plan C, and a plan D, so that if my plan A stops working, I'm not in a crisis. And then also, a hedge is something that will grow, that will do better in a crisis than what I currently have going on. So I can make sure that no matter what, my income's not going to go to zero, because I know that my recession work will increase in a recession, even if my strategic planning consulting decreases.
Yeah, and I would imagine it's got to be important, I'm thinking, and you correct me if I've got this wrong, is if you are a solopreneur in the consulting world, have more than just you and your services being available, but have a platform, a body of work that you can sell as a product or service in and of itself, versus just you being, the ubiquitous you out coaching, teaching, whatever. I'm hoping the answer to that is yes, because here at the Business of Story, of course, I've created my overall brand and business leadership storytelling platform to be a unit, something that you do over time versus just me showing up and presenting on it. That's a bit of a hedge that I've got going. I'm hoping that's going to work in the next one. I know I was running my ad agency when the last one hit, and it was tough because we saw our business literally drop off the table. I mean, literally overnight, the end of October of 2008. Yeah. 2008, it was fall of 2008, just fell off the table, and we had to do major scrambling. And one of the biggest challenges we had at that time is we had been serving a lot of different clients in a lot of different industries, and you think that would have paid off for us, but it didn't. And in hindsight and looking back, I wish we had been more positioned with a pure focus in one or two industries. I think we would have survived it a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not only a yes, I'm a hell yes on everything that you just talked about.
Oh, good. I feel better on this end.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it, Park, is that if you are a solopreneur and you're still gracious enough to be listening to us going on here, part of it is that you're your own inventory. And so for me, I do 100 days a year of consulting. And that's really the max that I can do, want to do, both for my sanity and for logistics, for scheduling. That's really possible. So I am constantly working to build in the background, what is that passive source of income? What's the recurring revenue that I can start to build up so that as the years go on, that I can more pivot to something that lets me retire, or mailbox money, something that lets me earn money while I'm sleeping. So it's great to wake up in the morning and know that people have bought copies of Rock the Recession on Amazon, or people have gone to recession.com and they picked up a couple workbooks for their team, or the other products that we sell. I mean, all of that is building. And I think, unfortunately, for a lot of people, it probably will take us actually hitting a recession for them to go and get ready for it. But for right now, I can tell you that it's really helped with a lot of my business, having it to tell my story, because telling the story as the recession.com guy is interesting. Telling the story of, hey, I'm a guy that can help you out as a strategic planning consultant is a big yawn. There's hundreds, they grow, they're everywhere. It's like, I'm a sales consultant, or I'm a business consultant, or I'm a marketing consultant. There's so many of those, but I have yet to find another recession consultant out there. And so it's either a great idea or maybe it's the worst idea ever, but at least it's unique. It lets me have a story that's original and different.
Well, and you have a brand purpose. Let me help you survive the most turbulent times in business you are ever going to have. And instead of screaming in it,
to clarify, I was thinking about you and prepping for this podcast. My purpose is that nobody should have to borrow money from their mother-in-law.
In the fetal position under the kitchen table, not your mother-in-law, just yourself.
Yeah.
All right. Well, final thoughts here, Jonathan, as we start thinking, and you've got our blood pressure raised a little bit about the potential of a recession. What are 1, 2, or 3 things, in addition to what you've told us here, that our listeners should start considering right now in preparation?
Yeah, the first step for me is going to recession.com, doing the free assessment, just figuring out what your score is. From there, you'll get all the questions and you'll know the different areas that you can focus. And then each quarter, I would pick out 1 or 2 of the areas that you're red on, that you're not feeling great about, and just slowly work at chipping away at those. So I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing is to develop those relationships with companies that you want to acquire, or with assets that you want to acquire now, when everything is good, when things are rosy, so that when we hit a recession, you're top of mind, so that the banks call you first, or so that companies call you first to give you opportunities that everybody wonders why you're always so lucky that you happen to be in the right place at the right time. But you'll know it's really because you had the foresight to plan, to do the work of making sure that you were top of mind, so that you can put yourself in the middle of the street, so that when the lucky bus comes by, it runs you over.
Well, and if I may add one more thing to that, I'm not the recession business storytelling guy guru at all, but I have anticipated, or I can see it happening because I ran my own business and it drove me crazy during the recession. In speaking with a very large ad agency here in town a few months back, they are growing, they're making hay in this great period they've got, but one of their executives confided in me. He said, Park, business is great, but my biggest concern is we don't stand for anything. We take in all business. We can do everything across the board. We got public relations, we got digital, we got traditional, we got media buying, but we are just a big shop. We don't have that singular focus on any one thing. And he says, I'm afraid of the next recession and how it's going to come and decimate this organization. And we're talking an organization with 150 employees, which is pretty big for an ad agency here in Phoenix. And so I would say to him and to listeners, from my own experience, purely, get your brand story straight. Get it dialed in. So when that recession hits, and it's going to sooner than later, that you stand for something significant in the hearts and minds of your customers and your employees and your bankers for that matter, because now they all know who to turn to help see them through and get them through the storm. It doesn't mean you're not going to have to cut back maybe a little bit here and there, because they're going to cut back on what they buy from you. But if you try to be all things to all people sailing into a storm, it's like one of those big ships, with their every single sail up trying to catch the wind, and it destroys the ship. But if you can get that singular focus, to play off of this analogy, you become the lighthouse in that storm, the go-to brand. And I can't stress enough, now is the time to really dial in what is your purpose-driven brand story, so that you'll be a beacon for them when this hits, and it's going to hit sooner than later, I fear.
And it's having that lighthouse built beforehand, because it's hard to build the lighthouse in the middle of the storm. So
absolutely,
if you're the ad agency, it's thinking through, what is our marketing going to be when we hit the recession, and how can back to your ad agency, when we were first hitting the recession, if you had something teed up so that you could go to your clients and say, we're going into a recession. I know that ad agencies are likely the first thing that everybody will want to cut, but we've got great ideas for how we're going to grow your business in the recession. And here's some thoughts on what that could look like for you and how you could pivot. Then I think you're buying time and you're adding value. Whereas if you just wait for them to call you and they've already made the decision to cut you, and then you try to scramble and tell them a story such that they want to, keep you, then it's just desperate. Yeah. So the more that you can be proactive, the more that I can go to my clients and say, I'm the recession guy. I've got a plan for it so that when it hits, we're going to be covered. Then I feel like I'm going to be one of the last things to get cut. But if in the recession, all of a sudden they called me and they said, hey, John, we've loved working with you. You're expensive though. So we're going to have to part ways during the recession, and we'll call you later. Then all of a sudden I'm like, but wait, I've got this other recession thing I do, and let me do that for you. It's so hard to tell that story when you're on the ropes already. It's so hard to do that when the waves are crashing around you. So I really think that's something the audience could take away. But you've got to have that teed up now, because once they're announcing it on CNN and Fox, I just think it's too late. People are just scared. They're going to just cut expenses, and there's not going to be a chance to really, make that relationship at that point.
The category 2 winds of that category 5 storm have now hit the beaches. And, the one other thing about that, if you dial in your brand story now and really have a purpose behind it, you make hay while the time is good. It's not just for the recession, but it gets you super focused on how you do things differently and therefore better than your competition. So anyways, Jonathan, so great to have you on the show. This is a different topic than we typically cover on Business of Story. And I was curious, I love your book, Rock the Recession. And I guess folks can get that on Amazon, on your website, wherever?
Yeah, they can get it on Amazon. And then if they want to go to recession.com, they can do the free assessment is a good starting point. And then we've got some other products if they want to do their recession planning and pick up a copy of the workbook or the planning kit.
Yeah, terrific. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'll let you get back out there and do the good work you're doing in preparation for that next big recession.
All right, Park, rock on.
All right, thanks. And thank you all for listening to this edition. If you liked what you heard, or even a little bit like, egads, I don't want to think about that right now, but you've got colleagues, bosses, friends that are running companies that you think can benefit from Jonathan's advice, and by all means, please share this episode with them. It may be the nicest, best thing you did for them kicking off 2020, if indeed Jonathan's prediction is correct and we may be seeing a recession towards the end of the year. With this administration, you never know what in the hell is going to happen. So it's good to batten down the hatches now while still making hay while the sun's out. And of course, if I can be of service to you in helping you dial in that purpose-driven brand story, reach out to me over at businessofstory.com. Always here for you. If you have any questions at all, feel free to email me at park@businessofstory.com. And of course, if you are trying to push your story out to the world, publish it in a meaningful way with all the dashboards and the tracking and the analytics you need to make sure that it's working, with all the pre-planning that you can do and the scheduling of your stories and your podcasts, then go over to our friends at Sendable.com. You can get 30% off of their traction plan right now by visiting Sendable.com/Park30. And until next Monday, when we will have another amazing story artist for you, like Jonathan, right here on the Business of Story, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.